Because he's going to take the focus away.
I'm the political director for MCV and our suite of organizations. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay, should we turn it up more? Okay? Turn it up. All right, is there a way to do that here? Thanks. I'm the political director, I'm not the tech director, so you'll have to forgive me. How's that? The cheap seats can hear me? Okay, great. All right. Thank you again for coming to our 2024 post-election panel here at Brothers Tapworks. My name is Molly Bell. I'm the political director for MCV and our suite of organizations. Whitney Tawney, our executive director, was supposed to be here tonight, but she caught the Capitol crud a little early. And so she sends her regrets, really sad that she's missing this great discussion, but we also have a live stream, so I'm sure she's tuned in. So before I introduce our panelists, I want to just give an overview of what all happened last Tuesday. So first the disappointing news from MCV's perspective. For the first time in a long time, all of our federal delegation is represented by anti-conservation elected officials. And obviously we are very disappointed in this result. We endorsed Senator Tester, Monica Turnell as well, and we are really sad to be losing Senator Tester as our conservation champion, and we thank him for all of his hard work. On the state level, all of our land board is made up of anti-conservation elected officials, and so we have an uphill climb in a lot of ways. But the good news is that we were able to elect Judge Catherine Vittigary to the state Supreme Court, which will preserve our liberal support and hopefully help us protect our constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment. We were also able to flip 12 legislative seats. It was 11, but Scott Rosenblatt, who's here today, is officially up by 20 votes, and he is out of the automatic recount threshold. So congrats to Scott. So MCV put a lot of elbow grease and hard work into this election cycle. We are obviously disappointed by some of the results, but encouraged by a lot of the results on the local level, and we will continue to do what we've always done, which is fight for our clean air, clean water, our public lands, advance good energy policy, and we're excited to continue to do that work and to work with our elected officials and to hold our elected officials accountable. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and kick off our discussion tonight. First, I would like to introduce Senator Pat Flowers and also congratulate him on being elected Senate Minority Leader today. Senator Flowers has served as state senator since 2019. As minority leader during the 2023 session, he served on the Natural Resources and Fish and Game Committees, where he pushed to pass the best policies for public lands, wildlife, and hunting. When faced with a bill that would have limited voter choice and instituted a jungle primary for only the U.S. Senate race, he stood up for democracy and fair elections. Senator Flowers, thank you for being here tonight. Next, we have Niki Zupanic. Since 2008, Niki has worked as senior staff for several statewide nonprofit organizations. Niki also served as executive director on the Montana Justice Foundation, where she worked to improve access to the civil justice system for ordinary Montanans. Before opening Zupanic Law, Niki was the deputy director and staff attorney at Upper 7 Law, where she litigated constitutional rights cases. Thank you, Niki, for being here. All right. Arren Kimbel-Sannit is a writer and journalist who has covered politics, development, and culture in the West for the better part of a decade. First in Arizona and now in Montana. His work has appeared in the Montana Free Press, where he was the chief political reporter, Politico, and the Los Angeles Times, and more. He's currently a graduate student in environmental studies at the University of Montana. Thank you for being here. So let's get into it. I'm gonna just ask all of the panelists to give me your general reactions, thoughts about the election, and we'll start with Pat here.
Thank you, Molly, and thanks for the invitation tonight. It's great to be here, and thanks to Governor Bullock for giving us our own little clubhouse here. We can get together. It feels really good to be among my people after a day of craziness in the Capitol already. I can't start talking about this past election in any case, I can't begin talking about this election without first talking about Senator Tester. There's nobody I respect more politically than Senator John Tester. He's such a gift to this state, and I can't tell you how sad I am that he's no longer going to be my senator.
Just look at that.
Which mic?
There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
in any case, we have to move on, obviously, and I am thrilled about picking up 2 seats in the Senate and 10 in the House. That came from a lot of hard work and compliments from the candidates who worked their tails off to make that happen. And as I look ahead to this session, I think we're going to continue to have fights to preserve our public lands and make sure we continue to have access to those public lands. Maintain stream access. We saw kind of a very sneaky attack on that in the last session that we were able to beat back. I think that's not going to end. If anything, it's going to increase. The overlords are now running the system here, and they don't want access to their streams. They want to be able to close them out if they can, and they have no interest in continuing access to our public lands. As far as I know, Republicans still have in their state platform that they want to sell public lands to the state, which is a bridge to privatizing those public lands. So I think now more than ever, we have to stay incredibly vigilant about any erosion at all. It's really why I got into this in the first place. My career was in natural resources, and kind of I could see to a certain degree where things were headed, and I wanted to do what I could to stop that from happening, at least politically. So the one thing I want to say, if I don't have a chance to say it later, I've been working for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as regional supervisor. I spent a lot of time talking to Anaconda Sportsman's Group, Skyline Sportsman's Group. Those guys chewed my ass every time I went over there. They held me accountable, and it was a kind of a bittersweet process. But thank God for all of those old dudes, many who are now passed away, because they fought every day. They went to work every day to protect public lands, and frankly, that's what we're up against here. And I think all of us on the road ahead are going to be having to fight every day to hold on to what we have. So that's my charge. In case I forget to say it at the end, I want to say it right now. Thank you.
I have to start off by thanking MCV for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Being on the panel was one of the few things that ensured that I took off my pajamas and took a shower last week. I knew I would have to at least catch up a little bit and see where we were, even at the times that I didn't want to. So I don't know that I'm anywhere closer than anybody else in this room to really understanding what happened last Tuesday and all of the forces that created the outcomes that we got. But a couple of themes that have been running through my head over the last week. In a weird way, we are seeing a swing back towards balance. Here in Montana, we did see the end of the Republican supermajority in the legislature. And we did see, unfortunately, nationally, a lot of ticket splitting, for better or for worse. What we also saw is something that I'm calling the fight between policy and vibes. And the good news is that there were several policy wins, even here in Montana. CI 128 passed. And you can see that in other states in the country when popular issues that help people's lives are on the ballot, people will vote for them. What they won't do regularly with consistency is vote for representatives who will make sure that those policies get enacted by the legislature. So I am heartened that Montana remains a state where we can go to the ballot box, ask people. We don't have to go through the legislature. We don't have to rely on the legislature to be the last word on what becomes state law. And the last thing that was kind of running through my head, because then I always want to bring it back to being a lawyer, want to bring it back to, well, who can I sue? Who can we all sue? What can we do to use that third branch and soon-to-be Justice Bidigary was elected. But what we also see, the third piece is, yes, I'm excited that we still have that branch to be able to go to and we have some recourse, but we definitely see an undercurrent of anti-institutionalism. Going back, I've tried to keep up as much as my mental health will allow me. I've tried to keep up with the Senate Select Committee on Judicial Oversight and preparing for tonight, just going back through and looking to see, well, what bill drafts do they have in? And they are unhinged. There are things in there that really do chip away at all of our protections that are afforded by the judiciary. So, that theme of, former ACLU lobbyist, I typically do not champion institutions just for the sake of championing institutions, but I definitely do think that standing up for a strong judiciary is a critical part of having a democracy that is protected. So those are some of the things bouncing around in my head.
Yeah, hi, and again, thanks for having us. I don't know if I have a ton of thoughts that haven't already been expressed. I guess from a more or less outside perspective as a reporter, I don't think that there was a ton in the results that surprised me. I mean, I think, frankly, a lot of the indicators nationwide and in Montana have been, pointing towards a more sustained period.
Who are you, Arren?
Do I have to introduce myself again? My name is Arren Kimbel-Sannit. Thank you. And I'm a former reporter and now a grad student. And I covered the Capitol here for 2 sessions. I think almost every indicator that we've seen in the state that suggests that people here are fairly comfortable with Republican politicians, if not necessarily their policies. I think that the smart money was basically on 128 passing, and a lot of the other results that we saw at the federal level, certainly at the state level, I don't think that any of those candidates on the Democratic side, I'm sorry, the pro-public lands side, were polling ahead, really, of their Republican opponents. I think Tester was the kind of main thing that was uncertain there. But even he was generally speaking polling behind his opponent, and I think the unfortunate thing is that no matter what really was said about Tim Sheehy in terms of opposition research, in terms of advertising, it clearly didn't seem to penetrate. And part of me wonders if that is a misread by the people who are spending money in these elections on actually how the voters in the state, who do include a lot of new people who were maybe not here in 2018 when Tester ran last time, what they think. I think partly on the public lands issue in specific, I've written recently that I think a lot of the focus on public lands in Montana belies the fact that this sort of concept of multi-generationality in Montana really only extends to a certain and fairly recent point in American history. And that I think basing a politics on a notion that still ultimately only speaks to landowning, multi-generational Montanans, white Montanans in most cases, will eventually run its course. And I think that there was some of that. I think that there was a lot of, basically just the influx of national politics. I'm frankly, I'm not an expert on what this means for the sort of policy picture moving forward. But I think, as Niki said, there's a huge component of voting, especially at this level, with this amount of attention from national observers, that is vibes-based. And I think the Democrats clearly did not have the vibes, and I think even if they did, may not have had the numbers. I think that there's a lot of soul searching that can be done about that, but I do think that there is a certain amount of math that dictated these outcomes. I would also agree with everything that Pat and Niki said. There's certainly some pretty seismic changes in the political order here, and I think for a lot of environmental causes, that means a significant threat coming from the state level. So, yeah.
on public lands played a very large role in this last election. And I want to direct this question first to Senator Flowers. And I want to hear maybe more of your thoughts on the role of public lands in Montana politics, as well as what impacts do you think this election is going to have on public lands policy moving forward?
Thank you, great question. I think that there is a recognition on both sides of the aisle of how sacred kind of public lands are, public land access. So I think any attacks that may come on that, I think will be subtle and effective. And that's where kind of the vigilance comes in. I think we have to, I went through this process today of looking at these arcane rule changes that are being proposed for the legislature. There's a reason behind every one of them, and you can't see on the surface necessarily what those are, but they're smart people, and they've pieced together a path to get to where they want to get to in terms of these legislative rules. Same is true in public lands. It's not going to be, hey, we're going to pass a bill and we're going to sell off all these public lands. It's not going to be that dramatic. It's going to be something more erosive, and I think that's what we're going to have to guard against. And I think this room and sportsmen and women across the state, conservation interests across the state, just public land advocates have a tremendous amount of power. When you show up in the Capitol and you make your voices heard and you stop every legislator and tell them how you feel about public lands, they listen. And I've seen it with labor. When labor shows up, when there's a right to work bill, and they raise hell in the hallways and they shout and scream and they wear their union strong outfits and shirts and hats and all that stuff, it makes a big difference. And the same is true with public land. So I mean, I think that's, when I said we've got work ahead of us, that's the kind of work that we're going to have ahead of us. Because yeah, there's going to be stuff that happens at a federal level, but probably what's more likely to happen at a federal level is they're going to facilitate the opportunity for states to walk down this path of disposing of public lands or turning them over to the state. They're going to open the door for that. But there's still going to be a step at the state level, and that's where it's going to be up to us to raise hell and not allow it to happen. And we have the power to do that. I've seen it in session after session, and so that's, once again, that's a charge in front of us.
I don't know that I have much to add to a discussion about public lands, but one thing that did strike me, as Pat alluded to, the federal government is going to do what the federal government is going to do, and then it's really up to Montana to figure out how to implement the newfound freedom that we think that the federal government will give. But another thing that I think will be an outcome of a change in approach on the federal level is a change in the discussion about the value of public lands. I think for the last 4 years, we've had a federal government that talked about public lands being valuable in a way that emphasized that these were something that could bind us together as Americans. There were pushes to secure more land to be protected as federal monuments or other protected lands. And I think we aren't going to have that nationwide conversation or that nationwide messaging out there. So then what is the positive message in Montana for public lands? I think most of us in this room can think about what public lands mean to us and why we would want to preserve them for future Montanans. And I am wondering about some other messages that maybe moderate members of the legislature who are thinking about tourism, who are thinking about why people come to Montana to recreate here. If there is a way to emphasize the value of public lands to those communities without denigrating just the fundamental premise that public lands belong to all of us and are sacred. But is there a way to be able to talk about public lands in that sense, and in the sense of it's also just good for Montana, for us to be good hosts, to make sure that we have lands that are available for people who come here to visit. And that again can be really tricky because you don't want to undermine the basic message, which is just that public lands are valuable in and of themselves inherently. But definitely seems like this is going to be a message that also could resonate with those newcomers who come to Montana.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add, or I guess maybe I would just say to that, and sort of the corollary to my last point. I think that in the statewide discussion about public lands, the overwhelming focus on their utility to recreation for sportsmen and women is ultimately a road that is going to reach a dead end. I think that there's, in the context of like an impending climate apocalypse, and with the very real implications that that has for people's experiences all over Montana and certainly all over the world, I think that as changing political tides happen here, people who want to protect public lands, which, I agree that they're important and sacred, but are still ultimately a political construct, need to have other explanations for why this is something that's integral to the Montana that that we know and love. That is something that needs to be protected at both the state and the federal level, beyond the fact that it's cheaper or free or whatever to hunt and fish than it would be on private land. Because I think clearly that message has limitations that I think have been visible in recent elections. I think that the senator is right in that it's still a huge issue in the public discourse. I don't think that the Sheehy campaign would have gone out of its way to hide some of these things if they weren't sensitive to the fact that the electorate cares about public lands issues. I think that's true. I guess I would just caution people who are in a position to make policy to sort of shape the public discourse around this issue, to think of other reasons why privatization of our natural spaces would be bad, other than recreation. I mean, because I do think, unfortunately, that is kind of the pervasive explanation that at the very least you hear in the legislature.
Thank you. And to underscore Senator Flowers' point about showing up, there is going to be a public lands rally at the Capitol on February 13th, so hope you all can make that. Details to come on that soon. Also, a democracy rally is planned for February 19th, so if you want to show up and give legislators a piece of your mind, those will be two good opportunities to do that. Moving on to impacts on energy policy, MCV supported two candidates for Public Service Commission this cycle, Elena Evans in PSC District 4 and Susan Bilo in PSC District number 3. We are also, MCV is also engaged in a lawsuit along with other plaintiffs about the PSC maps. During the 2023 session, the legislature heavily gerrymandered these maps and made it very difficult for a pro-conservation candidate to win. And so we are fighting this in court. We did get a positive ruling in a lower court on saying that the maps were most likely a gerrymander, but that they declined to change the maps before the 2024 election cycle. So we're waiting for a higher court decision on this, but during the cycle we did support those two PSC candidates for Public Service Commission. We feel that this is an agency that has really flown under the radar in a lot of ways, and they have rubber stamped rate increases. One of the rate increases was 28%, and at a time when Montanans are really feeling the pinch, in their wallets, we really can't afford to have a 28% energy increase, especially when we're not holding our monopoly energy companies accountable. So it's something that we're very invested in. We also are disappointed in those losses, but would love to hear thoughts from the panel on any thoughts they'd like to share about the Public Service Commission or energy policy moving forward at the legislature or on the federal level.
Change the lineup here.
I gotta be honest, I'm more or less out of the game. I really don't know what's coming down the pike in the legislation this year. Maybe go.
Ladies first. And this is great, because then Pat can back me up. One thing that I wanted to learn a little bit more about and think more about in preparation for tonight was what the legislature might do in response to the health decision. I know that we're still waiting for the Montana Supreme Court to rule on the appeal regarding the climate change lawsuit brought by a bunch of really amazing young Montanans. And in the middle of the trial, well, I shouldn't say for the trial, prior to the trial, but in the middle of the litigation of that case early on, the legislature in 2023 tried to make a couple of changes to in response to the case. The case was challenging the fact that the state had an energy policy in place that emphasized fossil fuels, and that the state had in place a law that didn't allow the state's own regulators to take into account climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, when they were doing environmental reviews before permits were issued. Lower court was going to be looking at both of those issues, and the legislature said, let's just get rid of that whole energy policy altogether. We can do it without a plan. We can go ahead and emphasize fossil fuel energy without having a plan in place. Let's not even give the court a chance to weigh in on it. And the other thing that the legislature did is they tinkered around the edges on the second piece, the state law that prohibited environmental review to include greenhouse gas emission considerations. So the plaintiffs then held the young Montanans won. The district court said we have a right in our constitution to a clean and healthful environment, and for the state to have a law in place that says we won't even think about one of the largest risks to that constitutional right when we're making permitting decisions, that's just unconstitutional. The state unsurprisingly appealed. Montana Supreme Court had oral argument, and we're waiting for a decision on that. But now we're back to the legislature having a chance to respond. So in addition to the PSC's decisions in how they regulate our energy producers and distributors, there is something about the legislature repealing the energy plan because they think that the state can go ahead and do these things without a plan. That makes me a little concerned because I don't know what that is. What are all of the ways? But also, are there things that the legislature will want to do in response to the health decision? Are there things that the legislature will want to do to make it even more difficult to challenge a permit once it's been issued? So I think that I'm definitely going to be looking at those ways that the legislature will be looking at making it difficult for average Montanans to be able to enforce their right to a clean and healthful environment through energy policy, whether it's implemented through PSC rate-making decisions or other regulatory decisions, or whether it's through the governor's office or DEQ or another state agency. I just have a feeling that the legislature obviously wants to do everything that it can to put more control in the hands of the executive branch and the legislative branch and not the judiciary. So I would be looking for a shift in the balance of where these decisions get made.
The two PSC positions were filled by former Senator Jeff Wellborn and former Senator Brad Molnar. And I served with them both for several sessions. I have a lot of respect for Senator Wellborn. He's a thoughtful guy. He's clearly a moderate. I was able to work with him a lot and drink a lot of whiskey in his office. So I know he's a good guy. But he is, I think, will be a strong advocate for customers. And part of the PSC's responsibility is to regulate the power monopoly in the state and make sure that customers are given a fair shake. We can probably all have opinions on whether that's been, whether they're meeting that responsibility or not, but I think Jeff Wellborn will be strong on that front. I have a lot of confidence in that. Likewise with Brad Molnar, who's the most entertaining senator that I served with. We called him in the last session the 17th Democrat because he voted with us so often and was kind of a counterpoint and a gadfly on the Republican side. So really appreciate Senator Molnar. He will also be a strong advocate for customers. He recognizes the impact of the cost of power on customers and on people of that can barely afford to turn the lights on. He's got a real heart for that, and I think you're going to see that in how he performs on the PSC. What I'm not as confident in is they're either unclear on Jeff, pretty clear on Senator Molnar, that he is probably not going to be as thoughtful or progressive in terms of transitioning our power to something lower carbon than where we're at now. If you watch the legislature over the last several years, you'll see a lot of angst over impacts in Colstrip and what's going to happen over there, and efforts to sustain the current situation. And I think that's probably going to continue with those two folks. So that's not a happy story for us that are facing kind of as Arren said, the climate apocalypse didn't get any brighter as a result of that election, that's for sure, and that's unfortunate. And it couldn't be more important now, in my mind. And we've got to figure out a way to win some of those seats and change the trajectory, because even the most modest, kind of more progressive policies that we've introduced in the session, and Senator Chris Pope is really one of our best, if not the best, energy expert in the state legislature. Even his efforts, the most modest efforts, barely make it out of committee. So it is a tough road, and we'll keep walking down that road. I know Chris is going to have some proposals going into this session, but it's going to be a tough battle, and we've just got to change the makeup of the PSC in order to make that happen. These are these weird, as you said, the positions that are so important to really our future that fly under the radar, and it's really hard to get people's attention on PSC positions. It just is like, these are the ones that your neighbors call you and go, do you know who I should vote for on this PSC thing? Yeah, I do. It's really important. So anyway, that's what we'll be working on.
Yeah, thank you for that, Pat. And we are really hopeful about Brad Molnar and Jeff Wellborn too. We have seen their record to be consumer advocates, and so optimistic. We were very disappointed that Elena Evans wasn't able to unseat Jennifer Fielder. She has been on the PSC for a term and has really not stood up for consumers. And she actually has led an anti-public lands group on top of all of that. So it was disappointing to see her get back into that position. We advocated hard for Helena just because she had she has very strong views about protecting consumers. She was running as an independent, which was very interesting in that district as well. Something we did hear on the doors was that people, as Senator Flowers mentioned, didn't really even know what the PSC was or what the PSC did. And so I think to Senator Flowers' point, there is a lot of education work that we need to do with voters about how important this agency is. Moving on here, at MCV, we believe that a strong or a healthy environment relies on a healthy environment. A healthy environment relies on a healthy democracy. I promise I haven't had anything to drink yet. So protecting our democracy is part of our charge as an organization. And I'd like to start with Niki here to talk a little bit about what she thinks the election results entail for the future of democracy in Montana, specifically voting rights, keeping the judiciary branch independent. Maybe pick your poison there, Niki.
I'll take all of them. I will drink all of that poison down. So in the 2021 legislative session, the legislature went on a tear of enacting various voter suppression bills. And they would say that they were enacting voting administration, election administration efficiency bills. But really the goal of them was to make sure that it was harder for Montanans to cast a ballot. Everything from making it, criminalizing someone dropping off your absentee ballot for you, to making it so that a concealed gun permit could be used as a valid ID, but a University of Montana ID could not be used as a valid ID at the polls, to rolling back same-day, election day registration. And after that session, all of those bills several voter suppression bills were challenged successfully. And the Montana Supreme Court upheld the rejection of all of those voter suppression bills. But hope dies hard with anti-democracy, anti-voter legislators. Christy Jacobson and Austin Knudsen have now appealed the Montana State Supreme Court decision that was based on the Montana State Constitution to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking the U.S. Supreme Court to decide whether or not the Montana Supreme Court had applied the right standard, had been looking at the issue the right way. Do I think that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take this decision up? I mean, knock on wood, I'm probably jinxing it, but I think that there's a very good chance that the U.S. Supreme Court does not take this up. About a year and a half ago, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a kind of fringe theory about legislatures having the final say on voting rights matters. So do I think that the U.S. Supreme Court wants to go through all that all over again just to tell Montana that their Supreme Court got it wrong? I don't think so. But I shared that very long-winded story just to give an example of how this will never die. These legislators are never going to be comfortable with many Montanans being able to easily cast a ballot. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more proposals in even just the next few weeks. There's a Senate Select Committee on elections that cropped up over the summer. Butte Silverboe had a a minor issue during the June primary where the county election machines, they were off by a few dozen votes. There had been a technical error, and it was caught, but it was caught after results had already been counted and released. And so to unwind that, obviously that got a lot of attention. And not wanting to let any opportunity to scream about election fraud or voter fraud, the Senate created a select committee to talk about elections. That committee has only met a handful of times, but they already have a couple of suggestions of what they want to look into before they adjourn in December for some Georgia type of election administration laws. So I am talking way too long about all of the nefarious ways that voter suppression could crop up during this legislative session. The good news is that I do still feel really confident that our courts give us a lot of opportunity to be able to push back on those. And our state constitution is a beacon of protecting voter rights and voting and protecting democracy. And so the only other issue I would want to touch on, it kind of dovetails with the lawsuit that Molly was talking about regarding the PSC redistricting. And one of the outcomes from that lawsuit is a conversation about what should Montanans have access to when it comes to the public records that the legislature has. So that lawsuit involved MCV and others asking Senator Regier, how did you come up with this plan? Who were you talking to? Where did this map come from? And Senator Regier, in the course of the lawsuit, said, I don't have to tell you. I'm a legislator. I've got a legislative privilege. My emails, my correspondence, if it's not sitting in the junk file, I don't have to turn it over to you in a lawsuit. The judge agreed with him. And now what the Legislative Services Division has done is they have taken that decision and they have said, oh, we now can use legislative privilege to shield so many legislative records from public view. And so that is part two, the sequel of the PSC redistricting. There are now, there's one lawsuit that has already been filed. I think there may even be more that will end up being filed. They're gonna push back on that because what goes hand in hand with voters being able to cast a ballot is voters being able to cast an informed ballot. And if Legislative Services is going to say that the default is that Montanans can't have access to the information that created these laws, to the information that motivated our elected representatives, then in my opinion, that just really runs counter to our constitutional right to know. So I would be looking for voter suppression, and I'd be looking for threats to transparency, and just a huge thank you to MCV for continuing that litigation and being willing to talk about not just the initial issue that got you to the courthouse, but the larger picture of how do we make sure that Montanans have access to these hallmarks of a democratic process, which is the right to know is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that. As a reporter, I can tell you that the junk files were, which is the sort of trade name for drafting documents, is another way you could put it, an invaluable resource for the sake of transparency, and in part because it tells you who's lobbying and who's writing these bills, because it's not, legislators maybe can attest, it's generally not the legislators who are writing these bills. And gives you a sense of who the forces are who are pushing things up, on both sides of the aisle, and it's really unfortunate and scary that those won't be, or those may not be, part of the public record, both for reporters as well as for anybody else who's engaged in this process. In terms of sort of democracy-specific initiatives, I think the losses of the two ballot initiatives, 126 and 127, are notable. I guess I can't really say how to read into that, but I would have thought that Montana, being a state that in a lot of ways resembles another state like Alaska, that has this ticket splitting, this independent streak, would have been a really prime target for initiatives that would open up the primaries, that, if a bunch of kind of things fell into place, could maybe lead to, or the system of ranked choice voting, which, I think if you ask the sponsors was ultimately sort of the objective. I think that could have done a lot to open up Montana politics, to both pave the way for things like third parties, as well as potentially to encourage, if you're going to accept a Republican majority in the legislature, at least encourage a more diverse array of Republicans. If both of those initiatives fail, I guess I would caution anybody from thinking that means that Montana voters don't agree, as much as it is that those initiatives are complicated and hard to understand, especially in concert. And that, frankly, I don't think the sponsors did a very good job of explaining the broader mission, which is to open up this political process of these two initiatives in concert. I think just telling people that an open primary is better because it's open will only go so far, unless you actually explain what the stakes are in elected politics here. And I don't really feel confident that the sponsors did a great job explaining that. I think a lot of, certainly Democrats that I talk to who aren't super keyed into the political process, who don't know the lore of people like Rob Cook and Frank Garner and Chief Vet and whatnot, saw Republicans attached to this and immediately assumed that something nefarious was going on, in part because of the legislation that we saw in 2023 concerning the Senate race, which tried to apply at least some similar language, but to a more nefarious end. I think that created a lot of sort of signal distortion in the conversation about something like ranked choice voting, or a majority winner in top four primaries. Even though I think that, frankly, certainly based on how Montanans voted on other things, would be decent fits for the state. I would also say, on to Niki's second point, that I think that the Supreme Court has been the sort of go-to venue of political disputes in the state for the last several years. I think that Corey Swanson's victory over Jerry Lynch may change that equation, but I guess I don't really feel like I know enough to say whether or not the court will rule dramatically differently, especially with Catherine Bittiger's victory, than it has in previous sessions. And I would also say that, by the end of his term, I think a lot of people took a justice like Dirk Sandefur to be a fairly reliable liberal, but that wasn't always the case. And for a lot of these justices, it's not like the Supreme Court, where the U.S. Supreme Court, where you can say, oh, it's like a 4-3 liberal conservative alliance. I think for a lot of Montana Supreme Court justices, they have a more nuanced view of politics and the Constitution. I guess I would caution against total despair at the utility of the judiciary in advancing, a pro-environment agenda, or at least defending the environmental premises of the Montana Constitution, because justices can be finicky people. Those are my thoughts.
Let me say, it's really nice to hear Arren talk again. I enjoyed your writing so much when you wrote, and I hope you'll keep writing when you finish your degree. You're a great voice, and right now, stories are incredibly important, so I hope you'll keep delivering those stories for us. I also have to say, it's really nice to drink a beer around Arren and not worry about what I say. So, as far as I know. Right, Arren? Yeah. And likewise, Niki, thanks so much for all your work at Number 7 and beyond. Certainly had so many victories, and thanks so much for that. We have gotten really good at special select committees over this interim. We have one on the judiciary, and we have one on elections. And out of those special select committees, we're going to get a whole bunch of legislation, and it's going to be, I think, really challenging to kind of withstand that flurry. And I'm so excited about the team that we have on our Judiciary Committee in the Senate, including Cora Newman, Laura Smith here from Helena. They're great, and they only have 3 votes. So it's going to be tough, but we'll do everything we can and to try and sustain that, or to withstand that attack. I mean, it's simply, on the judiciary stuff, it's really simply an attack on a branch of government that's supposed to be co-equal, that's trying to, that they believe is limiting their power. Well, they're limiting their power for damn good reason, and that's why they're there. And I'm just praying that we can bring enough kind of public exposure to this that the general public recognizes what a threat this is to our fundamental rights in the Constitution, because otherwise they're going to be trampled. So I think it's an incredibly important session in that way. As far as the election select committee, I think they struggled to find any smoking gun, and in fact they found no smoking gun. And so as Niki said, they're relentless, and that's not going to stop. I mean, they want to take away your right to vote, or limit your right to vote, and that's going to continue, sadly.
So we're coming to the end of our hour here, but I would love to open it up for a few questions from the audience. And Kirsten, who, if you're at the Capitol this session, you're going to be seeing her around. She's our program director. She can run the mic. So do we have any questions?
Yes.
Amen over there.
Sorry to do this. I'm going to have one comment and then a question. Sorry. I do want to just say one thing about this last election, post-election analysis. I think it's really important for us as Democrats to remember that there is a global wave of fascism and far-right movement, political movement. So I think there's been a lot of like, what did we do wrong? I think a lot of things, there's some things you can't stop. So I think it's important for us to recognize maybe we have some things to learn, but there is a global trend and we need to just find our way through it. So I'm just sharing that because I think we all need to remember that so we don't feel bad. My question is related to public lands. I worked on the Bears Ears National Monument, preservation, protection of that land. Wondering if anyone at MCV or any of you have thought about partnering in a more conscientious way with tribes to protect land because of their sovereignty.
No. In simple terms, the only kind of partnership that I'm aware of that's been real conscientious, as you said, has been focused on bison restoration, and I think that's ongoing. And whether it's on the CMR or related to the CMR and adjacent private APR, that may be an opportunity there. But that's the only kind of direct connection that I'm aware of between trying to work with the tribes to enhance public lands in any way.
I would maybe just say that I think more engagement with the tribes and the concept of sovereignty is important in adding depth and dimension to the public lands issue. That I think can make it a more winning issue, especially in states like Montana or my home state of Arizona, where the historically speaking Democratic aligned tribal electorate is huge in federal races. So I guess I would encourage people in this space to pursue more connections like that.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, Cora, because I had not thought of that angle, and that is something that my time when I was with the ACLU, ACLU since its inception has tried to partnered really strongly with Montana's tribal communities, and in a lot of different civil rights issues. The fact that the tribal sovereignty allowed for tribes to self-determine on different civil rights issues that our state government was not taking action on, did open up some opportunity. I've never thought of it in the area of public lands, and I love that you did. So another thing for me to be thinking of. Thank you.
So I do a lot more of our political electoral work, so I might defer this question to our program director or our deputy director, but from the election standpoint, when we were knocking doors and we were talking to voters who identified as Indigenous, public lands came up as one of the #1 issues. And so I think that there's definitely more work that we can do. On the electoral side, we have worked with Indigenous-led organizations on the partnership there. Indigenous communities have been on the forefront of conservation since time immemorial. So I think that there's definitely opportunity to build on those partnerships, and really appreciate you bringing that up. I don't know if Jocelyn or Kirsten had anything they wanted to add to that. I think that was great. All right. Any other questions?
I think one of the things, as we mentioned tribal land, I think the bigger threat right now is a legislation that was proposed last session, which is anticipated to come up again this session, which is undermining sovereign tribal rights regarding hunting and allowing feline hunters on tribal territory in which they control that autonomy. But I also wanted to mention and take a little bit of a point with Arren on public lands. Because again, public lands are more than just outdoor recreation. We also use them for livestock. We also use them for harvesting timber. Those are also our areas in which provide us our water that we use for drinking communities, our fisheries and the like. But again, I kind of have an issue with the fact that, again, I just did a quick Google of the Free Press, and there was no story of the Sheehy's stance on public land. So when we talk about these issues, I think communicating the information is very important, and again, educating voters is a tough task in this landscape. But again, I would ask again to the panel again, how are we educating voters of the impacts of, say, transferring public lands to states or local control? Because we've seen test cases across the West, like in Nevada and Utah, in which those states that have been transferred public lands have then just immediately sold them off and privatized them. And again, we're seeing that start to manifest under Greg Gianforte, where DNRC is already proposing state lands to be sold off to purportedly, address the affordable housing crisis. But again, where most of our public lands lay are in, quite frankly, areas where most people that need affordable housing don't live, nor could they afford to live. And it also creates a situation in which us as taxpayers are going to have to pay for those new housing developments in, quite frankly, the WUI sensitive habitat areas, and again, where we have to provide emergency services for fire, ambulance, and those things. So I guess I would just like to see where the panel thinks about how we can educate voters again against this direct risk, in which I think at least for the last 2 decades, the Republican Party platform has included transferring state, federal public lands to states, and then how we see DNRC now moving to sell off those public lands that are in our state pool that we use to fund education and the impacts that that could have in the long run. Thank you.
I would say that I agree with Jason. I mean, my point is not that there are not utilities for public lands beyond recreation. I obviously understand the importance that they have for water rights, for access to agricultural users like ranchers, to the tribes and concepts of sovereignty and ownership and connection to the land long before any of us got here. My point is that I think that there is maybe a gap in how pro-public lands candidates and groups are communicating that to an electorate that I can't change the results of this election, right? Like an electorate that clearly is responding to different stimuli than what many pro-public lands Democratic groups are messaging on. I am not going to bother to comment on the Free Press's editorial decisions since I don't work there anymore.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Arren said, it's the methods of dissemination that is, I think, the $232 million question or whatever, however much was just spent on the US Senate race here. Figuring out how to connect with voters and get that information to them is something that we just don't have an answer for. That's clear from Tuesday's results. There were a lot of voters who went to the ballot box who didn't have the information that a lot of us thought was common knowledge about the importance of public lands and other pro-conservation issues. Where are people getting their information? Where are voters in particular getting their information? And the traditional methods that we've been talking to voters don't seem to have worked this go round. Probably have not worked for a little while. What are other ways that we can be reaching voters where they are and where they're listening, where they're reading, where they're talking to other people? And the folks who figure that out the fastest will be, understandably, cashing some pretty big checks, I think. So I wish them well, Godspeed to them, because I want an answer to that too. I want to be in a conversation with my fellow voters, and I don't really know how to do that right now. And that's really demoralizing to me. I'm grateful that this space feels like a way, that I'm in conversation with my neighbors. How do I get this to another, 1.1 million Montanans?
I think the examples that you offered, Jason, is exactly what I was talking about earlier. I think it's going to be a slow erosion, and all of a sudden we're going to turn around and we've lost a lot. And so that's why it may be unreasonable, it may sound unreasonable at times to resist what seem like reasonable proposals, but we have to, because it is going to continue and continue and continue, and all of a sudden we're going to be Texas, and we won't have a damn thing to recreate on. So I don't know how to communicate it better. That is the $1 million question and the $1 billion question, but we got to figure out a way to do it, because I don't want to have my kids or my now grandkid not have a place to go. That places that are so important to me and that nourish me, I want to make sure they have that too. But it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of vigilance.
I agree with everything the senator said. But I'd like to point out, because I feel a little put upon, that the last thing he said is we may have a damn thing to recreate on in the state. And this is sort of my point that I mean in terms of messaging. It's not that it's not true, it's that it takes up a lot of space in the messaging around public lands, the recreation issue, because I think for a lot of policymakers, that's the experience, the lived experience that they have the most often. And certainly for a lot of us in this room. So I think that it just comes down to messaging. I'm not trying to speak about the reality of public lands and their utility, just the messaging.
Kevin, I just can't resist because when you talk about messaging, no, the Bundy standoff was about overgrazing in the end. And that's not the message that was coming through. The reason why the situation with the Bundy folks was so harmful to us and to our ownership of public lands is that we were allowing overgrazing to happen by letting that situation continue to go on. So yeah, it was a missed opportunity to share that message about the importance of protecting public lands and regulating how they're shared by all of us and used by all of us.
Thanks, Arren. As a politician, I'm an expert in hyperbole, so noted, and you're right. We have to be careful about overstating, but at some level, I truly believe that is a risk, and I understand the messaging issues there, so thank you.
So I'm gonna wrap it up. We did have a question if there was a pro-democracy rally planned for the 20th. Does anyone know about that?
I thought you said the 19th.
February 19th, I know there's one at the Capitol, but has anyone heard about anything on the 20th? No? Okay, sorry, to the gentleman who brought that up. I don't have any more information on that, but I want to thank you all for coming and being a part of this tonight. We are going to need your voices in the coming months and years ahead. The 2025 legislative session is kicking off. We're going to be launching Montana Pushback again, which is a communications hub that we use to help connect Montanans with their legislators. Over 3,000 Montanans last time were able to connect through Montana Pushback to send messages, call their legislators, and they want to hear from you. So I also want to recognize all the legislators here in the room, so if you could raise your hands. Yeah. Thank you so much for stepping up and for putting yourself out there. Best of luck with the session. I also want to thank Brothers Tap Works for hosting us tonight. And between now and 8 p.m., we get $1. Well, I guess between 5 and 8 p.m., we get $1 of every beer sold. So please go get your drinks. Thank you again for the discussion. I want to thank our panelists and. We also have a raffle going. Okay, Kirsten, you want to call the name for that?
I think we should let people, if you want to come up, if you haven't gotten a raffle ticket yet, come on up to our table. We'll do like 5 more minutes, last chance, and then we'll draw a couple tickets.
Thanks, everyone. Go Fight Win. Thanks.